Today on Uncommon Sense, we speak with Mike Creavey, an educator and speaker, the host of the Gracious Guest podcast, and the head of the Chesterton Society in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Viewers and listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Uncommon Sense. My name is Joe Grabowski. I'm one of the co-hosts of the podcast here, joined as always by my wonderful co-host, Grettelyn Darkey. Hi, Grettelyn.
Hi there, Joe.
And we're very pleased to have with us today on the program Mike Creavey, who is, as I said, the host of his own podcast, The Gracious Guest, as well as a local society leader up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, not too far from either Grettelyn and I. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Hey, Joe. Grettelyn, how you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Very good, thanks. So, Mike, you're kind of new on the Chesterton scene as a local society leader, and I think you got to attend a little bit of our previous conference, and so I'd like to start out just with kind of how you came to GKC, how you came to reading about and learning about Chesterton, and specifically what led you to want to get involved with the Chesterton Society.
Yeah, sure. No, I've been just so exciting to be on here. I've been a long time listener to the podcast, so It's sort of surreal, but I think just from what I hear from a lot of other folks, it seems like a similar situation where some folks I think remember where they first were, right, when they first read Chesterton. But then it seems like a lot of folks don't, it's almost like you discover him retroactively, like, oh, he's the one who said that thing that I've been quoting for years, or I thought that was, someone else, or I thought C.S. Lewis said that. And so I think there's been a little bit of that, of kind of discovering. I think I encountered him more than I had originally realized. But certainly, by the time I was studying theology, kind of late undergrad years, and especially in the seminary, he started to come up a lot more. And I think that really got me interested in Chesterton, and just more about who he was, of the sort of biographical details that are so fun, a lot of those anecdotes that we all cherish, and the humor. When Dale, of all people, of course, came to give a talk at Mount St. Mary's Seminary when I was a seminarian there, probably 15 years ago. And it was just wonderful. I mean, he did what he does, he just really evangelized, right, ultimately for our Lord, but really through this beautiful lens of GK. And I think I did go out and get some books right away, and I bit off more than I could chew, which normally happens with me. So I had to kind of go back and revisit some things. But the last 5 or 6 years, I've been encountering him a lot more as I've grown in my love for the classical education movement. Of course, learning more about the Chesterton academies as well. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think it just got to the point where some of us, kind of like-minded folks in our area here were like, hey, let's get a local society, see if we can do that. And it was pretty easy to do, to set up. So we've been going a little over a year now at the time of this recording, and loving it so far.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we say here on the podcast, Chesterton is better with friends. And so it's a very good thing. We encourage all of our viewers and listeners, if you're interested in starting your own local society, you can navigate over to our website, find some resources there, some advice on how to do that. And, you'll be connected in with this network of other local society leaders to share ideas, to kind of figure out what works best in your area, because it's not one size fits all. That wouldn't be very Chestertonian anyway. It's kind of just, people doing their best, and a thing worth doing is worth doing badly. So if we could pivot, Mike, you, as I said, have your own podcast, The Gracious Guest, and sort of your own approach to the apostolate. Maybe tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about that and your background and what it is that you do.
Yeah, well, it's always a very Chestertonian, I suppose, too. It's always this exploration of wonder and the mystery of just sort of my own life, sometimes reflected back to me, how, in some ways, how unlikely some of it still is to me, just what the Lord has brought me through. But by the same token, I always have this sort of like, I don't know, it's like this balancing act of, like, in one sense, it seems so utterly unlikely and so shocking still, but a lot of it, looking back on it, makes a lot of sense too at the same time somehow. And so I grew up Catholic. My family, we never really collectively wandered very far. I'm blessed to not have, needed, as some people do sometimes, that experience of kind of wandering away from the flock, and then hopefully the Lord bringing you back. But I had my own issues, my own doubts and struggles and that sort of thing. And I think for me, what really happened was in college, various things came together that it just really hit me like a lightning bolt somewhere along the line, how real it all really was. And I think I believed in God. I never really seriously doubted that God existed, but the reality of just the personal, every single day, sacramental, you could even say, maybe lowercase s, reality of how God instantiates himself everywhere, right? That everything is somehow, a fingerprint, something calling us, beckoning to us to look deeper. And so that, I think, any listeners, of course, who know GK far better than I do know, I mean, that's all over his writings, and how he tricks you, for lack of a better term. You don't see what he's doing, and all of a sudden he's talking about something so utterly mundane and boring that you're ready to turn it, like, what is this? Maybe I'll go to the next essay. And then he does that thing. And you're like, what? What just happened? Like, oh my gosh. Or as I've heard so many people say too, that have, I love that have had that same experience I have so many times with, like, yes, I've been saying that for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but he said it better 100 years ago, So it's no mystery to me why he has become such a great companion in a sense along this journey. But like I said, my own journey, it didn't really consciously kind of embrace his writings or that sort of thing, but we were, I think, cueing into a lot of the same perceptions. And my journey led me really into studying theology more in depth, and eventually got my master's degree in theology. I've been teaching mostly ninth grade, but all 4 levels of high school theology for 10 plus years now, on site, schools, also homeschool connections. And kind of in the background of this, I'm the kind of guy that would just get so fired up, even if the students weren't some days, about what we were talking about, that I would want to just, I don't know, do something else with it and put it out there. So once in a while I'd go home and like record a lecture or just some observation or reflection that was fresh in my memory. And then I'm like, well, there's this YouTube thing. Maybe I'll try that out. And, I didn't care who saw it per se. It was a good place to store things, or like, hey, I just read this book by the church fathers or one of the church fathers, and I wanted to share this insight. And, it'd get like 10 views, 50 views, and I was like, yay. And so after years of that, I sort of stumbled into Shroud of Turin stuff, and that went nuts. I mean, it absolutely, like, I'm the kind of guy that, like, when I went from like 100 subscribers to 200, I'm like, oh my gosh, I never imagined this. And now I'm somewhere over 7,000 now, which is just a tremendous honor. And it's something I really enjoy. So it's mostly faith interviews. And the biggest sort of view counts are anything I do with an exorcist, or anything on the shroud. But I try to, occasionally slip some other things in there too that may not get as many views, but they're important to me. And, or I might be trying to spotlight a former student sometimes, or like another coworker in the ministry somewhere. So if anyone wants to check it out, that's kind of the idea. Is I'm trying to be a gracious guest kind of in life, in God's creation. And I kind of lean on Ephesians 3:17, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. So this idea always struck me. It's amazing that, God humbles himself to become a guest in his own house, which is so shocking. I never get tired of reflecting on that. So, I should be anything but ungrateful or ungracious, or just, assuming that all of this is just random and doesn't have any meaning. That's just a very, I think, ungracious attitude to have.
or assuming that you're just entitled to it. I love the idea. It's a very Chestertonian idea that it's sort of given, and you are a guest in the world. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, and that every one of us then, of course, that every one of us is a gift to everyone, that your own life is not something to be taken for granted. So, so it's endless connections. One of my biggest frustrations is always in that sort of theology, ministry, and teaching realm, where I get what people are saying, so I don't like go off the hand, like go totally crazy or something when I hear it come up in a faculty meeting or a conference. But when people talk about like making the faith relevant, I always quibble with that a little bit, because my attitude has always been like, I don't make anything like it is relevant, and I don't think that's exactly the same thing as, like, I don't think necessarily helping people to see the relevancy of it in creative ways is the same thing as me doing something to dress it up. And because I think we've all seen that go awry, when occasionally like a well-meaning priest might try to make the mass relevant with some concerning additions, that sort of thing. Right. So,
well, kind of like you were saying, you only have to make something relevant if it's not relevant. So the fact that these things actually are relevant is all we have to do is point that out to people. The faith is relevant. Here you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what is the great Chesterton line that anything may be irrelevant to the proposition that Christianity is false, but nothing can be irrelevant to the proposition that Christianity is true. It will touch upon every aspect of life, and he was so wonderfully, I think, humble and constantly imbued with that sense of gratitude and wonder to kind of see it in anything, in everything. And I think that that's it's a very empowering message for nowadays, because I find a lot of Christians, especially Catholics, tend to sometimes get very fixated upon and preoccupied with finding their charism, discerning their particular way, and not that we all pridefully, certainly not pridefully, should go and kind of create our own thing. There's such a rich heritage to choose from, and there's so much that we've inherited, that you're probably going to find something that fits you. But on the other hand, make a beginning somewhere. Pick anything, and anything will be that road into deeper prayer and holiness, if you have that right perspective, if you have that right approach, that God is in all of his creation. He's imbued everything that is good, has some reflection of the divine goodness. I think it's just a beautifully it's so simple. It's a state, but not necessarily to live.
Well, and I'm not a Thomist or any sort of expert on Thomas Aquinas, any sort of expert on Chesterton necessarily either, of course. But I think it's something that just jumped out at me there. That I think a couple things that are really interesting is, Chesterton, of course, with his wonderful biography on Aquinas, or Dumb Ox, right? Is that he used? That was the title he used, yeah, in his Dumb Ox. Which, I mean, I've seen so many Thomists, right, say that that's just the most astonishing book on Thomas, after there's all these tomes out there. But I've often thought, I Chesterton himself, those cool stories, right, about how he wrote that book. I think Joseph Pierce covers this really well in his biography, where, he just inexplicably, right, just starts like dictating this thing, and then like, sends his secretary to go get some more books, and she brings them back, right, if I remember correctly, and he just sort of thumbs through them, and he's like dictates the rest of it. And I've often thought, like, it's so clearly, I think, not just a quick solvable, like, academic or intellectual question of how many details he knew about the guy's life. I think they were just tapped into the same thing, and the same sensibility. And this was coming back to me recently, because I might share the link with you guys, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Dave Palmer at all. Dave is a Homeschool Connections teacher, but he heads a Guadalupe radio network down in northern Texas, and we kind of just became friends over the years. And Dave has this beautiful thing he does with his students, and he's written on this a lot, where he focuses in on Aquinas's like spirituality of awareness. And we were having a conversation about this not too long ago, and it came up I think the Chesterton quote, and I don't remember where it came from, was something like, even the moment is momentous, or something about the there's this, every single moment is imbued with some sort of reflection on God. And I find that with my students a lot too, where some people would just say, oh, that's just, a good pedagogical kind of, trick or tool to have. And I don't disagree, but I think there's more inspiration to it sometimes, when I just have this sense that, like, this, I think this will hit right now. And one that came to mind was we were in the chapel and people were kind of goofing off a little bit. There wasn't really a lot of reverence going on. And I had this particular class section, a lot of athletes in there who take their sports very seriously. And I wasn't really actively thinking about this. I was actively thinking of how mad I was that they weren't that they weren't being reverent in the chapel. And instead of yelling at them, I just went up for like the concluding prayer, and I found myself just saying sort of extemporaneously, I gave them a little spiel about like what's expected of them, reminding them this. And the phrase that came out that sort of surprised me as I said it was, I said, guys, I said, if you can't get this, if you can't, lean into this, if you can't make this commitment, you're going to be JV for life, or something like that. I was like, you're gonna, it's like, I don't think, I was like, who here wants to be, who wants to just be JV at life, and you can see some, like, obviously no one's ever said that to them. It was lingo that they knew, but somehow it began this conversation of like, well, wait a minute, this isn't just something, this is actually something important. And it clicked with them in a way that was personal to them. Like they wouldn't behave a certain way during the big game. So why are they behaving, So it just, it can be the littlest thing in the classroom sometimes where, I don't know, I feel like I can at least crack a door. Whether or not they see what's in there, that's kind of up to them sometimes.
Yeah. I can hardly imagine trying to corral a room of young teenagers, but God bless you. But yeah, that's so how else do you bring Chesterton like into your work, especially in the classroom and homeschool connections? What do you specifically do besides maybe assigning Chesterton? Like how do you bring him in creatively?
So right now I've been thinking about this a lot lately because the curriculum that I'm kind of, I don't want to say confined to, but just, in terms of like what's my responsibility and everything with the way that we're set up at the school I teach at, the diocesan high school I teach at. This is going to make people upset. I'm not aware of Chesterton being anywhere on any of that. And so I kind of am taking it into my own hands, so to speak, as I am with a lot of other things sometimes with, what can I do, at least just in my class, so I'll bring him up. I'll bring other saints and very commendable holy people up in ways that are not frowned upon or anything by the administration, but it's not on their radar. But I'm trying to think of some more tangible things this year. Like my wife and I printed off a picture when we started our local society. We have a nice big, like 11 by 14 of Gilbert and Francis that's just like up in our kitchen, like above our like family calendar. Nice. And what's funny is like anybody who comes to the house, like we haven't been asked about it a lot, but like people would just assume it's like, you're a great, great, great uncle. And I'm like, he kind of is.
Yeah.
I'm like, I kind of, he's like that really awesome uncle, and that's just how I always feel when I read him, but I'm wondering, I'm kind of going through some stuff right now, trying to actually find a good way to bring him into my 9th grade, because I know like at the Chesterton Academies, there's, obviously built into the curriculum, certain selections. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. Do you guys remember what they do in 9th grade? Is it Orthodoxy or is it Dale's?
Do they do Everlasting Man in 9th grade? I don't remember.
I don't
Not
think
that's 9th grade. I don't.
I think it might be later on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it
might be
Orthodoxy.
like Apostle of Common Sense or one of Dale's like texts. So I might. Yeah, and I might because for me it's like it's an intro to the Bible, because a lot of them, the biblical literacy is just terrible. So I do a real kind of nuts and bolts biblical literacy course / condensed version of the Old Testament kind of narrative. It's sort of like Scott Hahn, A Father Who Keeps His Promises, and Dr. John Bergsma's Bible Basics for Catholics kind of combined.
It's pretty good.
And condensed down. So I use that. But the whole course kicks off with a unit for a few weeks on just very basic philosophical questions about, is this even worth it? Like, how do how can we even have this conversation about God? And so we talk a little bit about just, natural law, like reality is real. Like, I mean, on things that like I can't believe, or I wouldn't have believed 10 years ago I'd have to spend this much time on, but we do with them, they really think so much of it's up for grabs. And so I'm feeling like that there's some real potential there, I think, in that first unit to sort of sneak him in a little bit. And then certainly in the second semester, it's a Christology course. So I'll pull all kinds of stuff from Everlasting Man probably, in this year to sort of pepper through there. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, that's a good one. Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
Chesterton. Yeah, I mean, Chesterton, so much, I think, of Chesterton appeals on this kind of level of the heart, right? And I think that that's a really important thing for anyone interested out there in leading with Chesterton and educating with Chesterton, evangelizing with Chesterton, is that he recognized sort of the insanity of the modern world. And as he sort of diagnoses that, let's say in orthodoxy, he points out that the appeal isn't necessarily going to be a rational appeal. Not to say that the appeal is irrational in and of itself,
Right.
but it's sort of pre-rational. You need to shake people awake from torpor first before you can kind of then speak into their and I commend anyone interested in education and working with young people because of the challenge that this represents, especially nowadays, because one of the ways that I think Chesterton most beautifully speaks to this is through his reflections on nature and the creation. And sad to say, I think, I look at even young people in my own life that I know, they don't, they spend all their time indoors. They're not outside. Even, so much of the soccer practice might happen in the gym or whatever. So even the things that used to be forced outside for sometimes don't even need to take place outside anymore. It's something that I think we would all do well to consider as, maybe one of the most basic things is just getting young people back in touch with reality and nature.
Yeah.
And then Chesterton will have that ground to plant the seed and speak to them, because otherwise it can be, I think, quite challenging. Yeah.
Well, and then just the magnitude of God's creative power. I mean, I've tried this thing. I'm trying these things called Scole days. I know the near, not far from me, well, closer to you, Joe, of course, the Chesterton Academy out there at Martin Saints, they do the Frassati Fridays, kind of invoking soon to be Saint Pier Giorgio Frassati. Hopefully maybe someone watching this next year or something will, be able to celebrate that. But, known for his outdoors activities and being a real mountain climber and skier and all that kind of stuff. And, I don't really, our campus and kind of where we're at, it doesn't really, we're kind of in the middle of like all these, main thoroughfares and highways and stuff. Like I can't really take them too far, but I at least try to bring it in sometimes to the classroom where I'll just bring in a leaf or something bizarre. Sometimes I haven't found this yet, but I want to find I'm hoping in some antique shop or something, like a taxidermied squirrel, like something really weird, and just like pull it out of a bag and set it down and just be like, what is this? Like, let's really, and to not let them get, oh, it's a squirrel. Okay. Yeah. What's a squirrel? Well, it's an animal. Like, okay. Yeah, no, come on. Like, do you have any idea how bizarre and complicated and fascinating a squirrel is? And how many trees, I don't even know how to begin to tell like what our ecosystem would look like if God hadn't designed these things to be so completely brainlessly forgetful that they forget where they put the nut. That's all they do. Like all day they go around, there's one, and trees grow. Like it's hilarious, and so I think there's nature, even like the grandeur and the amazingness of it, but also the humor of it. Like God has a sense of humor. There's some really weird animals out there, and I think he thinks it's hilarious.
Not even to mention the bugs, but
yeah.
But just that's great though, because I think a lot of it is, like Joe said, is kind of waking people up and shaking them awake, and we're in such danger of taking this beautiful world for granted, and that's, I think, one of the most important things about Chesterton is his reminder that the grass didn't have to be green. We could be living in a black and white, sad place, but he gave us this beautiful world, and with all these amazing, weird creatures. And my son's very into nature shows, and I know way more about like cuttlefish and bizarre creatures than I ever have in my whole life. And it's amazing what's out there.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
Well, and how he can communicate. Oh, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the opportunity is always there too. It's anything you stumble upon. And, I think just guiding young people to make full use of those is a key thing too. Because otherwise it just becomes curiositas, right?
Yes.
And why curiositas is a vice for Aquinas, because it's idle. You're not entering in. But provided you avoid that, then we really do live in a blessed age. I've been binging little YouTube documentaries about beekeepers recently, just because I'm just so fascinated by it. And the number, I'm gonna mess it up because I didn't commit it to memory watching it, but I was startled by the statistical facts of, like, for a pound of honey, it takes something like 10,000 honeybees, and they'll visit over 3 million flowers or something like that. And they fly the distance, a distance equivalent to around the world so many times, or it's like a third of the way to the moon and back, basically, just for a pound of honey. And think of how ubiquitous honey is. That it's just wow, what a design. You could just sit there and marvel at it all day. Yeah.
And that's some of that stuff, again, that first unit, that the examples that I can get into in my class, because like I use a portion of the Catholicism series, which really still holds up, that original series, where Bishop Barron gets into a good breakdown of I think it was Ratzinger in his, I think it was the 1968 Introduction to Christianity book that he's specifically pulling this from, but Ratzinger kind of reflecting in that, sort of post-Einsteinian age, of a lot of this scientific, speculation about certain things, and really leans into that amazing, just, it doesn't make sense to just expect it, like you said earlier, Grettelyn, or to feel entitled to it, like the fact that everything's intelligible. Or the fact of intelligibility, the fact that there are laws of nature to be discovered and understood, and that there's consistency, but it's not a bad question to say why, and that's not a scientific question, that itself. Let me give you, I wrote this down because I don't want to forget it. What really led to my little sign off I use a lot of times, don't forget to wonder, on my shows. First of all, it's a reminder for me, because I'm as guilty of anybody as just slipping into the, efficiency driven, like, what's the next thing I just have to do? It's very difficult to find those moments of schole and contemplation. But my dad, and he didn't mean this in a negative way. He was just astonished when I got my first smartphone, and I was showing him something on it. It was the constellations, whatever. It was something legitimately neat and incredible that human beings have invented this thing. And he just he just shook his head in awe, and he just, funny enough, wonder. But he said, "That's amazing. Like, you don't have to wonder about anything anymore." And I immediately, like, that made my heart sink. And I've told him before, I said, thank you for, in a weird way, inspiring so much of what I do, because it's like, but is that good? Right? Like, I just immediately get the answer. And I've used examples. This might seem bizarre, if I may. When I have a little time to kill in class, once in a while, I'll pull out you guys know the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about trivial. I mean, it's trivial, but trying to connect, stars, through all these different movies. And I'm really good at it. It's completely useless in eternity. But what was funny about it was I was explaining to the students the one day how the game goes. And I said, let me tell you how this used to go. I said, 15 years ago, what made this fun is as you're driving with your buddies on like a 3 or 4 hour car drive. You're exhausted. You're doing everything you can not to fall asleep at the wheel. And then you have an argument, and you're like, yeah, that was that movie with so-and-so in it. It's like, no, it was this guy. No, you idiot, it was him. No, and you have this argument, and no one's pulling a smartphone out to go to IMDb. Yeah. Like, you have a fight. Like a good, like, friends try, and then you contextualize it. You're like, no, I'm telling you I'm right, because remember, we went to see it at this place back then, and then you said this, and like, oh yeah. And they don't do that, right? Like when we, the students, or like even us, like when we pull the phone out for the immediate answer, you cut yourself off from this ability of, just even in a silly way, something as silly as that, looking at a bigger contextual picture. And so I think all that's kind of at the background of what I try to do in my ministry as well. And even, like, for example, like the Exorcist interviews and such, that's not, like, it's a little clickbaity, fair enough. But what I try to use that for is for anyone coming to those videos, for example, just for scary stories of exorcisms. It's like, no, we're also going to use this to catechize you a little bit. Why are these things happening more? Like, how do you really, find deliverance from it? So there's a lot, any conversation that I can get into on there or like in the classroom, those are my favorite. Lecture's great, but like, the discussion is really what I enjoy.
Well, and recognition of spiritual realities is so important. I mean, my husband and I had our sort of latest reawakening of our faith about 1.5 years ago because of exorcist videos. It was just the realization of like, oh my gosh, this is so much more real than we've been treating it as. Yeah. And I want to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Let's make sure this happens. And it just can reset your priorities in a very, a very sort of intense way, but it can be good.
I love how chill all of them are. Like everyone I've talked to, they're like, yeah, and it's like, oh, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. He's like, Mike, I've seen it 100 times. Like they're not smart. Like, well, they're not creative. Like they're super intelligent, but they don't do anything with it. Like they're not loving. They're not wise. They're super powerful, but like, who cares? Like, let's get them out.
Reminds me of Chesterton too, because I think he has a section in one of his books where he talks about how kind of boring the devil is. After a while, it's just all the same. And like you said, he has no creative power. So that's intensely comforting. I don't know.
Well, isn't that beautiful just in the life of our faith too, where, you look at someone, I loved at the conference, I got to sit in on Joseph's wonderful, talk about the friendship of Belloc and Chesterton. And, I think the world always sells us that lie, right? That, if you follow the life of Christ, you follow this Christian path, it's just going to be boring and drab and, just very like a real narrow band, and you're going to be so limited. I mean, that's the whole narrative. And it's like, it's amazing to me how absolutely opposite the truth is. I mean, Stalin, Trotsky, Caligula, like those guys are basically identical. You just switch out the costume essentially. Like there's not a whole lot of variety with the way they think and the way they behaved and treated people. But like you couldn't be more different, right, than Chesterton and Belloc. You couldn't be more different than John Paul and Mother Teresa in some ways. Or you have your St. Francis, but you also have your St. Dominic. Like the variety is incredible in the church, and that's, to me, that makes sense because look, like you brought up Grettelyn, all the different animals. I mean, how many species of ants are there? I think I might have mentioned
too
that.
many, but I mean, not like really. But
I feel like I brought that up in the Everlasting Man conversation a few weeks ago because that still blows my mind. Like, why did like dozens and dozens and dozens of species of ants? Why? He loves them for some reason.
Yeah. It is. It's incredible and awe-inspiring and humbling as we find our part in it in the universe. But humility, it's one of those base virtues, but I think Chesterton points out somewhere it's not the end, it's not the terminus, it's the virtue that predisposes you to the growth of the other virtues, and that's gratitude and courage for adventure and things like that. So to let that really blossom forth into gratitude, and then let that gratitude overflow into charity, I think is the example that he sets us, which is so much needed for nowadays. Yeah.
Well, I'd said to you guys in our emails before this too, like I think what my whole resistance to that reductionist tendency is just, in my own life, realizing just firsthand, it's not like it's a doubt in my mind, but I've also been blessed, that there haven't been certain things that may have happened in my life to really make me question it as strongly as some people do. But the fact that, life, creation itself, right? But that life is a story, not a math problem. It's like, there's details, there's things to be, studied and appreciated that can open your eyes, hopefully more to the story. But they're not the ends in themselves. Even something as goofy as like I had a buddy of mine who was really upset over one of the newer Star Wars movies, which to be fair, I was too, but he was upset because like the shield harmonics weren't right compared to a previous movie. I'm like, dude, you lost me there, man. Like that's not, no, it's like Star Wars is more space fantasy than science fiction, technically, I'm more of a fantasy guy anyway, But I see that with some of my friends too, where they miss the forest for the trees. I mean, we have proverbs to describe this problem, right? In high school, we went to. You guys ever been to Newport News, like Virginia Beach at all, and like the Navy base there?
Mm-hmm.
We got a little boat cruise and stuff, and they were showing us the aircraft carriers from very far away, and they're telling us a little bit about them, and they said kind of how fast they can go, what the official speed that's put out that they can go. And I'm standing there, and I just went like this. I was like, how do you get a ship that big to go that fast? Right? Clearly a rhetorical question. And my dear friend Dan, God bless him, he's a super smart guy. And he spins around and looks at me with this look of just shock. And he's like, nuclear powered jet engines? And I'm like, okay, yeah, Dan, I know. Okay. All right. Yeah. Bravo. That's just, but no offense to him, but like people who really can't ever kind of let that attitude go. Like it has its place, but I just feel like there's so much more of that I encounter where either people aren't paying attention at all, they're not interested at all, which is sad, or they're paying attention, but they're just really focused on the scientific kind of, perspective, and they're missing the story that's going on, and that's why I love things like The Man Who Was Thursday, or oh my gosh, I just lost it. Man Alive, like so many of his novels, right? Where yes, it's paradox, but like what's really going on there? For me, it's like, it's this long build up to just something so completely surprising and wonderful that was always coming. And now you can see that it was always coming, but you didn't see it coming.
And a lot of his novels,
that,
yeah, and a lot of his novels, there's really not much happening. Like it's funny,
right.
but there's a lot of like sort of like philosophical discussion, or Napoleon of Notting Hill. All they do is like prepare for battle for like all but one chapter of the book, and then they have a fight, and you're like, okay, but the whole time there's this intensity building, and the characters. Although Chesterton's characters can sometimes be more of vehicles for ideas,
right?
But there's this idea that these things are important, these people are important. He's dwelling on random people that you're like, why are they even part of this? They always end up having a say in the end. But yeah, it's interesting how he's able to spin a story out of almost nothing so many times. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well, the beauty of how like no character is wasted, because sometimes it's like, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I remember it better. And so what's funny is I will also, my mind is weird. I'll remember where I was, like what aisle in the grocery store I was in, like when like, Tuesday's identity was revealed, just all these bizarre. But what's so funny is it's like with some books, I feel like some characters, they really don't need to be there at all, right? Like, I mean, they're completely like, do I need to follow this character? What's sometimes a little frustrating when I'm reading Chesterton's fiction is I know I can't get off that easy because he's not, this is going to be important. I don't get it right now, but I'll hang in there, and that's just, I like that I always feel like when I'm reading anything he wrote, there's a little work to it, sometimes a lot of, but you feel like, at least I do, I just feel like it's going to pay off, and maybe it won't this time around. And not to say that's just a utilitarian thing, but like some stuff, you read it, it's just, why did I do that? Like that, or I had to do that for something. Yeah. But that's of course never the experience with GK. I love it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think we're just about getting towards time here for the episode, Mike, but it's been such a pleasure having you on. Any last words of wisdom, advice, or maybe just an exhortative kind of thing to go forth with for our listeners?
I point people to, there's all kinds of books, but one of the best books I ever read that kind of gets at a lot of this, in a not super obvious way, but you kind of figure it out as you go, is Tom Howard's 1968 or 69, I think it was 69, his book Chance or the Dance, A Critique of Modern Secularism. And it's been republished recently, Ignatius Press. I think Eric Metaxas did a forward to it. Phenomenal little book. Howard died a few years ago. He was a good friend of Peter Kreeft's. And he wrote it before he was Catholic. And it was I first encountered it. It was our main textbook in a sacramental theology course I took with Dr. Regis Martin at Franciscan U. And it seems weird, like when you start reading it, like, where's the stuff about sacraments? The whole thing is. And I think that hit me in a really profound way that has fed into a lot of what I do, and encourage people first maybe check that book out, but also he says at the beginning of it, he says there was an old myth and a new myth. And he's speaking in terms of that epic vision of myth, not like a make-believe story. He said the old myth he said the new myth says that nothing means anything. And the old myth, that we used to believe said that everything means everything, right? Like it's all connected. And this relatively new thing where nothing really matters, there's no signification. I think that is something we can all meditate more deeply on. It'll help us in our faith, of course, in our day-to-day life and just everything. And it's all over Chesterton too.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, great advice, great book recommendation as well. I'm a fan of that one also. So it's been a pleasure having you on, Mike, and we'll make sure to put links in the show notes where our folks can find you and your podcast, and hopefully we'll talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Take care.
And Grettelyn, thank you as always.
Thank you. Wonderful time.
And to you, viewers and listeners, thank you for taking this time to be with us. We really do appreciate you. You're why we're here. This is, while we appreciate these great conversations for their own sake, the trouble of opening up the browser and getting the recording stuff set up, that's because of you. And so if you appreciate what we're doing here, we ask you to leave us a comment, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you get notifications, hit the bell. So that we can be in touch with us. Any feedback or recommendations for future guests or feedback for previous guests can be sent to podcast@chesterton.org. And we do hope to see you either for the Everlasting Man Book Club, for future episodes of the podcast, or other things that we have coming up, because we love spending that time with you. As we know, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.